Imagine, a bullet has just pierced your skull. Hot blood floods your face, blinding you. The left side of your body no longer responds. It's paralyzed. The fighter's cockpit is a chaos of twisted glass and metal. Below you, only the endless blue expanse of the Pacific Ocean. For anyone else, it would be the end. A leap into the void toward an almost certain death, or a final, desperate suicide attack. But for Petty Officer First Class Saburō Sakai, death was not an option. Not on that day. Blind in one eye, partially paralyzed, and missing most of his instruments, this man piloted his damaged Zero fighter for nearly 5 hours, covering more than 1,000 kilometers to get home. And no, this is not the plot of an action movie. It's the incredible, almost inconceivable true story of Saburō Sakai and his impossible mission. A story about the power of human will that defies all logic and physical limits. To understand how a man could accomplish such a feat, we must understand who Saburō Sakai was. Born on August the 25th or the 26th, 1916, sources are not in agreement. In Saga, on the island of Kyushu, Sakai was not an ordinary boy. He was descended from an ancient samurai family, warriors whose code of honor, the Bushido, had shaped Japanese culture for centuries. Although his family had fallen into poverty, the samurai principles, duty, discipline, and absolute loyalty were etched into his DNA. Sakai was not a great student, but he found his calling in the armed forces. At 16, he enlisted in the Imperial Japanese Navy, enduring training of unimaginable brutality. However, that iron discipline forged in him an extraordinary resilience. In 1937, his destiny took flight. Out of 1,500 candidates, he was one of 70 admitted to the prestigious Navy Pilot Training School, graduating first in his class, which had only 25 pilots. His talent was pure. He flew the Mitsubishi A6M fighter, the legendary Zero, as if it were an extension of his body. The Zero was an extraordinary plane, lightweight, incredibly maneuverable, and with amazing range. In the hands of an ace like him, it was a lethal weapon. Before Pearl Harbor, Sakai had already fought in the skies over China. But it was with the start of the war in the Pacific that his legend took shape. On December 8, 1941, just hours after the attack on the American fleet, he participated in the raid on Clark Air Base in the Philippines, where he scored the first Japanese aerial victory against an American pilot, shooting down a Curtiss P-40. In the following months, his number of victories grew. Malaysia, the Dutch East Indies, New Guinea. Sakai became one of the greatest aces of the Imperial Navy. This is where the numbers get interesting. Official Japanese records credit him with 28 victories, but his autobiography, Samurai, component placement, and many Western sources speak of over 60 enemy planes destroyed. He was famous not only for his skill, but also for an ironclad rule. He had never lost a wingman in combat. His eyesight was legendary, as was his ability to read the battle. He was, in every sense, a modern samurai commanding a lethal weapon. And it was this warrior who, on August 7, 1942, found himself leading a fighter formation toward an island that would become hell, Guadalcanal. On August 3, 1942, Sakai's air group, the Tainan Kokutai, moved to the base in Rabaul. A few days later, on August 7th, the news arrived. American Marines had landed on Guadalcanal. The island was of vital strategic importance. They had to be repelled at all costs. For Sakai and his men, the mission was almost suicidal. A round-trip flight from Rabaul to Guadalcanal covered over 1,800 kilometers, pushing the Zero's range to its absolute limit. They would have only 15 to 20 minutes of combat over the target. That morning, Sakai was thrilled. He would finally face the famous American carrier pilots. Arriving over Guadalcanal, he found a hornet's nest. The sky was a tangle of planes. With the coolness of a veteran, he plunged into the fray. Soon, he spotted and shot down an F-4F Wildcat fighter, piloted by Ace James "Pug" Sutherland. Sakai thought he had killed him, but in reality, Sutherland managed to bail out and save himself. But it wasn't over. Shortly after, Sakai spotted 8 planes in the distance. Believing them to be Wildcat fighters, he prepared for a surprise attack, his specialty. He approached from behind and below, in the enemy's blind spot. It was then that he made a mistake that would almost cost him his life. Those weren't fighters. They were SBD Dauntless dive bombers, and unlike fighters, they had a tail gunner. As Sakai prepared to fire, the world exploded. He was met with concentrated fire from 16 machine guns. Before he could react, a volley tore through the fuselage of his Zero. The canopy shattered. A .30 caliber bullet found its target, hitting him directly in the head. The impact was devastating. Sakai described it as if a blacksmith's hammer had crashed into his skull. The pain was blinding, instantaneous. Total darkness. The plane, out of control, entered a deadly spiral toward the ocean. For a few moments, which seemed like an eternity, Sakai was unconscious. The freezing air whipping through the destroyed cockpit saved him, bringing him back to a state of partial lucidity. He tried to open his eyes but could see nothing. A river of blood gushed from his wound, blinding him. Panic. Blind, in a plummeting plane, out of control and heading for the sea. With a superhuman effort, he took off his goggles and wiped his face. His sight returned, but it was a nightmare. His right eye was gone. With his left, he could barely see. Then, the other horror. He could no longer feel the left side of his body. His arm and leg were inert, paralyzed. He was a broken man in a broken plane. But the warrior's instinct took over. With only his right arm, he painstakingly regained control of the Zero, pulling it out of its dive just a few hundred meters from the water. For a moment, he was safe, but the situation was desperate. He was seriously wounded and almost 1,000 kilometers from base. Options flooded his mind, all of them terrible. Bail out? A slow death sentence. Or follow the Bushido code, find an enemy ship and crash into it. Die for the Emperor. But as he contemplated this end, a different thought took hold. He thought of his family, his comrades. Going back seemed impossible. No one would expect him to try. But in that moment, against all logic, against his own training, Sakai made a different decision. He refused to die. He would attempt the impossible. He would fly home. Thus began one of the most incredible survival journeys in aviation history. 4 hours and 47 minutes. Over 1,000 kilometers. For Sakai, it was an endless agony. The first enemy was the pain, a constant, searing presence. To stay conscious, he resorted to a brutal method. He kept touching his open wound, using waves of sharp pain to ward off the numbness. The second enemy was his own body. The paralysis on his left side made it almost impossible to control the plane. He used only his right arm for the stick and his right leg for the pedals, an immense effort. The blood continued to flow. He felt his strength abandoning him. The third enemy was the plane. His Zero was a wreck. The missing canopy exposed him to a freezing, deafening wind. Many instruments were shattered. No compass, no radio. His only guide was instinct, forged over thousands of hours of flight. He navigated using the sun, the clouds, and an almost supernatural knowledge of the Pacific currents. A gamble against astronomical odds. The hours passed with excruciating slowness. Sakai's world shrank to a few elements: the roar of the engine, the wind, the pain, and the endless expanse of water. The loneliness was absolute. To fight despair, he clung to memories. He thought of his childhood, his mother, his fellow soldiers. Those thoughts became the fuel for his will. At one point, he realized the fuel tanks must be nearly empty. He had flown much longer than expected. Every extra minute in the air was a miracle. Yet, he continued to push on. It was no longer a matter of skill, but a pure and simple battle of will. The man against himself, against the machine, against the ocean. After more than 4 hours, when all hope seemed lost, through his wounded and blurred left eye, Sakai saw something. A dark spot on the horizon. A hallucination? Number. The spot grew larger. It was land. It was Rabaul. A wave of relief almost overwhelmed him, but it wasn't over yet. He had to land. And landing a fighter requires precision, coordination, and perfect vision. Sakai had none of these things. He made several passes over the base, unable to clearly distinguish the runway. On the ground, seeing the bullet-riddled Zero flying so erratically, they understood the pilot was in serious trouble. Sakai lowered the landing gear, praying it would work. With one last, titanic effort, he aligned the plane and began his descent. The landing was a miracle. The plane bounced, skidded, but remained intact. He taxied to a stop. When rescuers opened the cockpit, they found a gruesome scene. Sakai was slumped over the panel, almost unrecognizable, covered in blood. He was still conscious. Barely. After reporting to his superior, he collapsed. He survived a surgical operation without anesthesia, but permanently lost the sight in his right eye. His story became a legend. But for Sakai, the war was not over. After months of convalescence, against the advice of doctors, he insisted on returning to flying. He became an instructor, but it wasn't enough for him. He returned to combat and, incredibly, managed to shoot down more enemy planes. He even participated in some of the final missions of the war, days after the Emperor announced the surrender. After the war, Sakai changed profoundly. He embraced Buddhism and vowed never to kill another living being, not even a mosquito. He became a messenger of peace, convinced that Japan and the United States needed to understand each other, so much so that he sent his daughter to study in America. He met many of his former adversaries, building relationships of respect and friendship. His autobiography, Samurai, became an international bestseller, telling his story to the world. Saburō Sakai died on September 22, 2000, at the age of 84, after being a guest of honor at a dinner at an American naval base. His life was a testament to human contradictions. A lethal warrior who became a man of peace, a national hero who found humility in defeat. But more than anything else, the story of that flight from Guadalcanal remains one of the purest and most powerful demonstrations of human resilience. It reminds us that even when the body is broken and all seems lost, the human spirit possesses an almost unlimited capacity to resist and, against all odds, to survive. The story of Saburō Sakai is not just a war story. It is a universal lesson in willpower. Do you know any other incredible stories of survival or forgotten heroism? Write them in the comments below. We are always looking for extraordinary tales. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss other stories of men and women who defied the impossible.